Hi everyone! So Season 11 brings a pretty massive shakeup to Diablo 4, including the return of Capstone dungeons. So I've tried this out and this is something I was really looking forward to seeing coming back into the game. If you don't know what Capstone dungeons are, they are effectively a fixed difficulty setting challenge that you have to overcome in order to unlock a specific feature. So in the past, they were used for World Tier 3 and 4. You had to do that dungeon to then go to the next difficulty. And it's always like locked in on a specific level and a specific monster setting, basically. And it's the same again now, because back in Vessel of Hatred launch, they actually removed monster levels, but they actually brought these Capstone dungeons back as a fixed monster level challenge. You can actually see this here. For example, at the top, you see this level 30. Monsters, even though my character is 33. Usually monster levels don't exist anymore, they are just always the same as you, but in this case this is actually like a special scenario. But compared to before, we now have 5 capstone dungeons and not just 2. So we have all of these here, but the later ones are also, let's say, a little bit more optional than the first ones. But they also give you like permanent like upgrades for the season when you play it. So we can see this actually here in the like season journey, which is now called season rank, I believe. So effectively you have the first 5 chapters that each are completed by doing one of those capstone dungeons. And then you get specific rewards here. So for example, you get a skill point here from the first capstone dungeon. And then you have the second one that gives you another skill point. So now we don't have to renown giving us that from the start anymore, but instead it's like part of your seasonal progression and the journey. And I actually leveled my character from start to finish, like level 1 to tournament 3 or so yesterday. And I was like fast forwarding it a little bit towards the end just to kind of like see how this will go. But it was actually a very nice leveling experience, I think, because it has generally sped up a little bit, it seems. But also unlocking the skill points as you go by doing like various objectives. You can also see this here in the season rank, for example. There's a skill point here from doing this thing. There's another skill point there, and so on. So you kind of like get them as you go. You open this thing, you look, okay, I have to do that. So you do like 1 hour city run, you do like half an hour of Hell Tide, and then you do the capstone dungeon, and then you go to do the next thing, and so on. So it feels much more interesting, I believe. And once you have done this once, you have it unlocked for your alts. So your alts can start immediately, blasting and just kind of like rush through the leveling journey a little bit better. But those capstones here are still kind of like a cool way to, really track your progression. You also get like a really nice comparison between your builds, for example, or with just your progress as a player, for example, with this fixed difficulty challenge that you have to do. One interesting thing here is also that the second capstone is set to level 50 and monster difficulty penitent, but it unlocks the pit. So you can actually go into the pit before you are level 60, which is kind of interesting. So now if you're like really powerful and you're like absolutely destroying everything, or if you're like twinking, for example, well, now we can actually go straight to the pit and grind that out, which is very cool, I think. This is actually something I was really hoping to see for a long time, because we actually had this in the past where even on like, let's say, a season start character, we had builds that were good enough to just blast through Penitent, especially if you got a little bit lucky on the way. And then there's obviously a lot more room to grow with, for example, twinking out your character with like imprinting, tempering, mythic items you can wear at level 35. If you had those and you were just leveling your alt or something like that, well, everything was a joke, basically. And now you can actually fast forward this whole journey by going to the capstone and then, for example, straight into the pit. And there, everything will be set to level 60. So you're going to get a lot of XP and you will like rush through the leveling journey on your alt, for example. And then you also have these later capstone dungeons here where you also have more of these like objectives, and you get then not the skill points, but you also get the paragon points. And then, you kind of try to fill out these seasonal objectives as you go until you have all of these things unlocked. So again, you do this like once a season and then you get the stuff. You also get a bunch of gear on the way, like this here, for example, but that's not really that crazy. And I do have to say, you shouldn't underestimate those capstone dungeons. Like some of the stuff really hurts. I've been testing around a little bit, like for example, how tanky do I have to be? How much damage do they do? And so on. And those recommended levels are definitely pretty good recommendations. So if you go in there like very underleveled, you're just gonna not really have a lot of damage. You're not gonna have a lot of like defense as well. Even on the barb, I was like sometimes getting kind of annihilated and some of those dungeons if I went in too early. Going in a little bit early did work out, so I tried to make this like as close as possible to like a season start scenario, where I like didn't really imprint and temper all my stuff and so on. So this was like a relatively like realistic picture, I guess. But this is the second capstone dungeon here, for example, where monsters are level 50 penitent and I was level 46, and that was pretty tough, to be fair. And I even had like 2 offensive aspects that were relatively decent and so on. And well, I would sometimes just like get one-tapped. If I went in there at like level 40, for example, with like half the toughness, like some of the abilities would just like straight up one-shot me, for example. So going in early is going to be quite challenging, I think, if you don't have like, you know, everything prepared from your main character or something like that. And it's going to be very fun to see what people will actually do when the season comes out, and, you know, in general, like the leveling journey and the speed running to max level and so on. I think it's going to be very cool. I feel like the only thing that's really missing here is some sort of like level ladder. So similar to, for example, the conquests in Diablo 3, or maybe just like a similar ladder from Diablo 2, for example, where you just see like the highest level people. Would be very cool to, you know, attached to the system here. But I can definitely see myself also organizing some community events similar to like this Hardcore as Ep event that we had lately. Maybe like a little race to like first capstone or second capstone or something like that. I think that could be really cool, and we'll see what it can do basically. But yeah, for now, just kind of like showing off some of the later capstone dungeons. This is the second one here. This is Elias. He's coming back. So you see also from the clip at the start, we had a curator, which was one of the old bosses on the old capstones, and here's Elias again. It's not exactly the same capstone dungeon, so there is new objectives, new monsters. They've definitely like, you know, moved stuff around, but I kept the old 2 bosses, which I find kind of fun, to be honest. So that was like a nice little twist to see Elias again. And then we have 3 new capstone dungeons that come in the torment difficulties. These capstone dungeons are actually visible on the map, so they have these little like golden dungeon door icons here, and you can see them in various places. So here's one that is like the 3rd one now for Torment 1, and then the other one was there in like Havazar, for example. So you can just kind of straight TP into it, similar to Nightmare Dungeons. You don't actually have to run there. I'm not sure if I like that too much. I feel like for these like one-time capstone dungeons, it would be relatively nice if there was a reason to kind of like go out and maybe ride there or so. I think it's fine for Nightmare Dungeons to TP, but here it seems a little bit whatever. But okay, I'm not really like stressing myself too much about this little detail. Here is like, for example, I just finished the 2nd capstone dungeon and went straight to the 3rd one. So I went from level 50 Penitent to level 60 Torment 1. And you see the difference. So I get absolutely destroyed just going straight to the next capstone. Even though I got like, I think 4 or 5 level ups in that previous capstone dungeon. It's actually a relatively long dungeon. You can easily spend like 10-15 minutes in one of them. So here in my recording, I entered this dungeon at like 159 and something. And now if we like fast forward this a little bit, I was doing a little bit of testing as well. I was not trying to go super fast, for example. But yeah, we kind of cleared this whole thing. Yeah, 14 minutes later or something like that. So I died on the way. You can definitely do it faster. Actually, some of these dungeons don't really have a lot of objectives that are mandatory. There's a bunch of like bonus objectives as well. So we have this here, for example, where we are in the 3rd capstone, and you see on the right, there's like bonus, destroy the pile of supplies. I don't even know what it does exactly. So that was just like sometimes giving you like maybe a bit of loot. I noticed that in one of the dungeons where I did that, there was like a chest popping out or so, but overall you kind of just want to get through this thing, and the bonus stuff is whatever, I would say. But they did bring back some pretty interesting mechanics. So for example, here this is the 3rd capstone right now, Employment 1, and they actually have a bunch of like citadel layouts and even bosses and some of the mechanics with like just how you progress through the thing. So you can do something of like a bit of like a solo citadel run with this, which is kind of interesting. So it had like a really interesting vibe here, and very good like reuse of the assets and like all of the mechanics I have created there. But you don't have to have a second player with you. There's also a few other fun little interactions that they brought back. For example, here we have like some of these chaos guys from season 10, and when you kill them, you get like these like, you know, swirling damage buffs around you that actually just kind of like wreck shit. So that's kind of cool. So they brought this back a little bit, and there's like all these like fun little twists that I have put in those dungeons that are not really present anywhere else. So it is definitely a bit of like a special experience to go through these. and I had a ton of fun actually playing through them. This here, for example, is the 4th capstone dungeon now, so it still says I'm on Torment 1, but you can actually just enter the capstone at any difficulty basically. They're just kind of there, and they're always set to whatever difficulty the dungeon is, so it doesn't really matter on which one you are usually. But yeah, here you also have this thing where you have these lightning strikes coming down, and it's like one of the mechanics in this dungeon, and then you can, for example, destroy these Tempest altars, and then the lightning strikes stop, for example, and you can like more easily go through the rest of the dungeon. The later 2 capstones definitely are a little bit shorter, I noticed. So it was mostly kind of like you can run straight to the boss and just fight the boss if you want. And this is it. And the other capstones before that definitely had like various steps where you had like maybe a mini boss at the start, or you had to like open a door with like animus carriers, for example, or some stuff like that. And the last 2, you can actually kind of like speedrun through them. But they also don't really offer anything really crazy, because they just give you like a bunch of like Paragon points basically. So while it was pretty fun to actually try to like challenge myself by going in very early, it doesn't really seem very worth it, at least for the later capstones. But for the first capstones, you get the skill points, you get a pit unlock, so all that kind of stuff is relatively good. And you probably want to do it as soon as you can, so kind of like struggle your way through a little bit. And maybe the last few, you kind of just like, whenever you're ready, you're just like speed farming Torment 1, then you go to the Torment 1 dungeon. If you're speed farming Torment 2, you go to the Torment 2 dungeon. So I wouldn't really try hard too much in those cases, and just kind of wait until your character is ready and then go in and have an easy time. And if you're curious, I have benchmarked my toughness values a little bit here. So I was just kind of collecting what feels kind of comfortable here. So toughness is a new stat, or like a pseudo stat actually, it's not a real stat, that combines your maximum life with your damage reduction effectively. So it tells you how much EHP you have. And in that case, you see that it kind of ramps up with like, your life goes up, your armor goes up, your rest goes up, and so on. And then you can get to like, dozens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of toughness or something like that. So this is kind of like what we're gonna see eventually with, people having like multiple hundreds of thousands of toughness, for example. But yeah, like for example, at level 30, when I walked in there, having like, for example, 400 toughness was fine. But then going to the second capstone, having 2000 felt like is kind of the minimum here to even like comfortably do this. Now, obviously, there is a little bit of like tweaking you can do, because some capstones have very specific, for example, boss fights with specific elements. So you can, for example, go for more cold res in the first capstone dungeon, and then for more fire or shadow res in the second capstone dungeon, and then like more lighting res in the 4th one, and so on. So you can definitely tweak this a little bit. There's probably like a bit more min-maxing I can do once I've played through them a little bit, and eventually I'm gonna have like maybe a guide for this as well, to like show you, okay, you can at least like change the gems in your jewelry, for example, and then get really tanky against lightning, and then this is gonna be a breeze, and so on. But yeah, in addition to just like the monster HP ramping up, your toughness also has to kind of like follow suit. So this is like what we see here mostly. So you see that it's like a pretty significant jump between those capstones, where it felt like it need to be something like at least double to quadruple or so tankier compared to the previous one every time you move up. As you see here, this is like a ×5, this is a ×2.5, a ×4, a ×2.5. And yeah, like then going, for example, to Torment 4 feels like you want at least another ×2 or 3 or so from there, for example. And that's already it for my summary for the capstone dungeons. So overall, I think this is a really good step for this game. I really love capstone dungeons personally. And for example, compared to the previous leveling journey, I think this really makes it a bit more spicy, a bit more interesting, and it even extends post level 60, which is kind of cool as well. So you kind of like progress towards those, then you unlock the season ranks with that, you unlock a bunch of these extra Paragon points, skill points, and all that kind of stuff, and that feels really nice. I really wouldn't mind to see maybe even another capstone after that is like Torment 4 exclusive, that maybe unlocks something special as well, maybe like a new crafting method, or I don't know, something like that, for example. Where like we have like a real reason to get there with our character, go all the way, and actually all these capstone dungeons, they are usually a little bit higher than the regular Torment difficulty setting. So for example, Torment 1 is pit 10, but the 3rd capstone is actually pit 15. So it's above that, and this is similar for the other capstones in the Torment difficulty. So they go a little bit beyond the original Torment difficulty. It would be fun to maybe see something like that for like a Torment 4 version as well. I'm definitely excited to see what we can do once we actually like play this in like a real season, and you know how it feels to do this on this class or that class and this build and that build, and also just, you know, what we can do with, like, for example, you know, going in early, like speed running through the content and seeing, like, you know, what is the lowest level clear of a certain capstone dungeon or something like that. So I loved doing that back in like pre-Vessel of Hatred levels, and the, like, you know, the journey was just so much more fun because of this, I think, because I was always just like, oh yeah, I am strong enough now, I'm gonna go in early. And if you're not strong enough, well, you just wait a little bit longer and then you do it later, right? There's nothing really to lose there. So that was really cool. Let me know what you think. I'm gonna have a lot more content coming out for the Season 11 PDR, so stay tuned for that, like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.